Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Conversations. My name is Rayushka. Mihiri, your mic is on mute.
Sorry, my name is Mihiri.
All right. So Open Conversations is actually an initiative taken by both Mihiri and myself, where we wanted to create a platform to discuss and tackle various types of issues and problems faced particularly by children, women, and the youth in Sri Lanka. So much like the name suggests, we want to have open and honest conversations that not only bring to light these issues, but also focus on educating our viewers and discuss what steps can be taken or done by us to help mitigate such issues. So please feel free to comment down below if you have any questions. Please do be part of our conversation. And if we do have the time for it, we will take up some of the questions that you put later on in the show as well.
With that being said, we want to jump straight into our discussion today, which is childhood at risk. I think within the past few months, we have seen some of the crucial issues that we are facing in our country when it comes to child rights and child rights being violated, and in general, the safety of the children in our country. So today, we are not only going to be focusing on these issues, but we are also going to be focusing on what can be done for us as a community and as an individual, what we can do to make the future more safer for children. And for this today, we have a brilliant set of guests with us. We have Tony Senewiratne. He has been a prominent voice in advocating for child rights in Sri Lanka. He is now working as the Management Advisor Compliance in the Asia region at Stromme Foundation. He also works as a trainer and a consultant to many NGOs in Sri Lanka. His work also focuses in corruption awareness and also peace building. He has worked for Habitat Humanity International. He has worked with Leeds and has been directly involved in setting up Escape, which is a specialized center to help victims of child abuse. Tony was also one of the very first board members of the NCPA, and he was also the first deputy chairman of the National Child Protection Authority in Sri Lanka. We also have Debbie Edirisinghe with us. Debbie is the founding director of Child Action Lanka, which is an organization that has been working in Sri Lanka to safeguard children and also provide assistance to women in need in Sri Lanka for the past 15 years. She's also the Asia director for FNE Trust. She is a global goodwill ambassador and the founder of the Global Child Rights Ambassador Program. She is a very strong advocate for child rights in Sri Lanka. She has expertise in project management, driving organizational change management, as well as creating holistic community development.
And from the image side, we actually have two representatives with us today as well. So first, we have Hazel Rajiah-Tetteh, who is an international trainer and an experienced coach who specializes in communications, people management, and personal development. Prior to joining Emerge Lanka Foundation as its country manager, she worked with MDF Training and Consultancy for 6 years and delivered leadership and people management courses throughout the region. Hazel has a passion for working with community-based organizations for development and advocacy, with special interest in collecting stories and conducting storytelling sessions for change and awareness. Hazel is very passionate about representing the survivors who Emerge works closely with as the resilient and strong individuals that they are, and works to shift the narrative from victim to survivor while also educating our communities about the issues of child sexual abuse. And last but not least, we have Jehan Mubarak, who is a former international cricketer and is a qualified high-performance cricket coach who is currently coaching a school's under-19 cricket team. He holds a degree in physical science from the University of Colombo. Jehan was also the chairman of Colombo Roundtable 1, which is a charity and fellowship club which provided Emerge with its first funding towards the Emerge Center for Reintegration in the year 2016. Ever since then, Jehan has worked very closely with Emerge, and he plays an active role in spreading awareness while providing his insights into Emerge strategies. So we are very thankful to all of you for coming on board with us today.
So let's straight away jump into our discussion today. I think it's first important that we discuss the basics first. So Debbie, if you could just walk us through in terms of the law in Sri Lanka, who is actually defined as a child and why it's important for us to have child rights defined separately and why it's important for us to be aware of what child rights is.
Right. So thank you for this opportunity and really good to be here with you. Basically, we define children as those who are below the age of 18. In Sri Lanka, that's how we define a child. And when we look at child rights, we're talking about, in 1989, the Child Rights Convention was born. And that's where about 196 countries joined in and signed up. And basically what we signed up to was that we were going to protect children. We were going to safeguard their rights as human beings. And so this is a special segment of them. So if you look at all the 54 articles of the Child Rights Convention, they can be categorized into 4 main pillars. And so we would say, the right to survival, the right to protection, the right to development, the right to participation. These are like main categories under which everything comes under. So if you look at the general survival of a child, I believe everything that the child does comes under those categories. So whether it is, their education, whether it is their survival, from the time a child is born into this world, the child has a right to have a nationality, to have a name, to be able to be identified as an individual. So I know, like when we see a baby as, and a very dependent, so like human being. And as much as they are dependent, we also need to recognize that they are individuals, they are independent beings, and they have their own rights too. So, when it comes to children, being able to be heard, being able to freely express themselves, they have their own thoughts. I mean, we all know, I think those of us who have kids know, children have their own thoughts. Sometimes they may not quite coincide with what we think, but they've got their own thoughts. And for them to be able to even express that, that's their right. When it comes to education, when it comes to development, when it comes to growth, all these things are basic rights of children. And when we signed up to the Child Rights Convention, though it's a long, rough road, what we signed up to is that we were going to go through with it. So basically, that's what child rights is. And I think in Sri Lanka, we signed up to it in 1990. And so it's been a while that we've actually, been on this road. So I think, we're pretty much on child rights when it comes to as a country as well.
Is there a difference between how children are treated from the age of 16 to 18? Is there any, in terms of legality or anything like that, when a child is 16 and after that? Is there any change that happens, or?
There technically shouldn't be, but I think the way society looks at it, the way some of the rules get sometimes changed around, yes, there are certain changes, but technically there shouldn't be, because up to the age of 18, they are children. Whether they are 2 or whether they are 18, they are children.
That's right. Thanks, Debbie, for clarifying that. And I think that was necessary for all of us to know as well, because specifically with this age factor, there's a lot of confusion as well. So thank you so much for clarifying that. If we're to kind of dive a bit deeper into, like, say, as Sri Lanka and like as the law of Sri Lanka per se, what is actually defined as child rights and what policies we actually have or laws we actually have in place for the protection of children. Tony, if I can actually get your insights on this, seeing that you have also worked very closely with the government on these issues.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you all for listening. It's great to be here. So let me just say one thing about what Debbie told us earlier. You may be interested to know that up to date, there are 2 countries that haven't signed up to the Child Rights Convention. That's the US and Somalia. I will leave it to you to find out why they haven't signed it up. Now, the question is about, under the Sri Lankan law, what is defined as child rights? Child rights, as Debbie mentioned, there are 50 plus articles in the Child Rights Convention, which has been broken down into 12 broad definitions of what these rights are. I'll just give you a couple of them rather than go into it. For example, every child has the right to a wholesome family life. Every child has the right to be raised well and become contributing members of society. Every child has the right to basic needs, and that's clothing, food, shelter, etc. However, these rights are kind of, what would you call it? They're like a virtual right. It has to be pulled down and made a law. So if the laws are not made, the rights don't actually mean very much, because you can't determine that people should practice or be punished if they are doing the opposite thing. So as a couple of examples, I will take, for example, in work, child labor. Now there is child work and there is child labor. According to the current laws, children can be employed at the age of 16. They can be taken on as trainees at the age of 14. Now, there are reasons for this, that is, but it can be abused. But this is the kind of law that you have under child labor. The ILO once did a survey and they came up with the fact that 1 in every 4 children are in child labor, but that was because they confused child work and child labor together. Another issue about children was a law that was brought in was the domestic child worker. Now, long before the convention happened, and even after that, until recently, domestic child workers were brought mainly from the estates or from other poorer sectors of Sri Lanka, and they were very vulnerable to all forms of abuse, even torture. And this was a huge problem. We have brought in very strong laws now to prevent it. And the laws of children that were there before and that were there after Sri Lanka brought in, after signing the convention, we had a presidential task force and another ministry that brought in a specific number of laws so that the Child Rights Convention makes sense. Another area is marriage. We are now actually at the moment struggling with the MMDA, which is allows children to be married up to the age of 12 and even younger. But if they are younger, they have to get a parental permission. Now, you may think this is just in Sri Lanka. Other children are also married, but not legally, although the legal age of marriage is 18. But in the USA, which is supposed to be a country with very high principles and high laws and all of that, there have been over 200,000 child brides from between the year 2000 to 2015 to 2019, the latest statistics. So there are laws in many states, but there are other states that allow children to get married at a younger age. But one of the things that I've considered seriously, that if children do get married at a younger age, that would be quite detrimental to them. Joining the forces, and probably is one area that Sri Lanka has kind of maintained the fact that no children are taken into the forces under 18. And the last one I just like touch on, because it leads to the next question, is the whole sexual abuse of children. And when we signed the Child Rights Convention, did we start looking at some of the practices and things that were happening in the country? At this time also, there was a lady called Senewiratne, no relation of mine, who was running an organization called Peace. And they were concentrating specifically on the boy child pedophile. Now, at that time, Sri Lanka was rated at the points of 1 or 2 in the world as the place for boy children, for pedophiles to access boy children. And this was because from, let's say, Chilau to down south, there were about 80,000 families living on the beach. And as the tourist hotels the tourism began to develop, tourists found that there was more to be found attraction on the beach than the ocean and whatever other attractions we had. And one of the famous statements that came out at that time was a parent who said, well, my son can't get pregnant. Another statement came out later, which we will deal with later. So this was one of the, at that time, it was a shock to Sri Lankans because they didn't think that we had all of these problems going on. We were under the influence, under the impression that in Sri Lanka, everything was quite well and we treated children very well and it was all going well. But then we found out that that is not true and the lid began to get lifted off. Not only in the Beach Boys, that's when we came in with the child rights, looking at all of these laws that were being brought in and new laws that were made. Prior to the Child Rights Convention, signing the Child Rights Convention, the maximum penalty that could be imposed on someone for abusing a child was a fine of US dollars 150. After that, we changed the laws, probably went overboard. The minimum penalty for touching a child could be 7 years and up to the death penalty on child abuse or anything further. We then found out that the child rights, the NCPA, which was created to look into basically problems of abuse, sexual abuse and other forms of abuse. And they became the policy makers. It was actually not to investigate or look into the problems because it came under the Ministry of Child Development and Women's Affairs. And we had under us working the Women and Children's Bureau in the police department who acted as the arm of going out into the field and taking on issues. But in case issues weren't resolved, then they could bring it to the NCPA and then we would direct the particular organization, whether it was the education. Because if you look at the board and the panel of the National Child Protection Authority, you will find that it's represented there by all the main organizations, including the defense forces, that would be involved in taking action if any problem regarding children happened. So it was a very powerful board and panel that we had, but things didn't always, there was always a problem between the policy and the practice. And so like one example that I would like to give, which I was involved in personally, when we had the Bindu Nuwara, where we brought down, the offer was to give LTT child soldiers a pardon and to rehabilitate them. But after a year almost of running it, suddenly people came in and all 26 children who were there, they were from a variety of ages, from 14 onwards, were all burnt alive. The children were then, 40 people were arrested, 5 were charged, given life death penalty, and 1 year later all were released. So this also reflects on what is going on today. Recently, a soldier was released, being accused and convicted by the Supreme Court for having raped and killed a young girl and her family. And it was amazing that the reason given was he couldn't have done it alone. But originally 6 soldiers were arrested, 5 were released. He was given the death penalty and then released. So between the policy and practice, although the NCPA has the capacity to go that level, there are problems with the judiciary. And of course, there are problems with the political and the executive. So these a bit, NCPA was set up under the president directly. And in our first meeting, we used to even have the meetings with the president at Temple Trees. But later now it has been moved and it still has the same function, but not as powerful.
So if we take all of that into consideration, what exactly can be reported in terms of if a child rights being violated, what under the law currently, what can we report?
Technically, any abuse of a child, any form of abuse of a child, whether it's mental, social, physical, or sexual, can be reported to the NCPA, but that should not be your first stop. Your first stop should be either the Women and Children's Bureau, and ideally you should report it at a district police station, because at the normal police stations, very often they don't have a special desk for women and children. You can also report it to other institutions, whether it's in the school, if it's the education department, you can take up issues with the education department or with the child probation care. But at the end of the day, if you feel you're not getting a service, you can then say, having reported this and nothing having happened, I want you to take action, and the NCPA definitely has to look into that complaint.
Okay. I think that sheds a lot of light actually on what the current situation is. And we discussed so many different aspects of how, like, say, a child's rights are violated. Jehan, you have worked closely with Emerge and thereby have also been exposed to various types of cases as well. If I could ask you, based on your experience, what do you think the children in Sri Lanka, like in what area are they affected in the most? You have things like lack of education, you have abuse, you have unlawful employment. So in that sense, what are your thoughts on it? And in your experience, what do you think is actually out there the most?
So firstly, the topic of abuse is so big. But we always, when you talk about abuse, we think it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, but it's such a broad spectrum. And children can get affected in so many ways. And it affects people differently. With boys, you're kind of expected with physical abuse, sexual abuse, that you get over it. But there's a huge emotional component there. With girls, physical abuse, sexual abuse, it's prevalent across not just Sri Lanka, everywhere. And I think it's, when you talk about what affects us most in Sri Lanka, I think it's just exploitation on so many levels. It could be for sexual reasons, or it could be for trafficking, so many levels. And children are being exploited simply because they're children. And the issue is that they don't have a voice, nobody speaks up for them. They don't have a forum, they don't have a platform. And our culture and society is very accepting of that fact, that children are children and should do what they are told to do. And then suddenly when they turn 18, magically they become adults, and then suddenly have to be responsible, not only for their future, but responsible for their past as well. And often they are portrayed as not the victim, but kind of like a perpetrator of a crime. Whether it's sexual abuse, whether it is trafficking, it's that spiral that, okay, you know, he's done bad things, or she's done bad things, and it's her fault or his fault. So it's a huge issue. And I just think that we need to look at ourselves and our systems and put the child at the forefront when we make decisions.
Thank you, Jehan. Just building up on from what Jehan said, and I think Tony also touched this a little bit, but Hazel, if you could walk us through a few points in terms of, if a case is reported, what is the importance of the timeline and the importance of evidence in a situation as such? And maybe in terms of legal financing, are these cases looked into? Is it free of charge, or is the government bearing the cost, or does the family or the victim themselves have to bear the cost when it comes to handling these cases? If you could just take us through a little bit through that.
Sure. Mihiri, like Tony said early on, there is a process for reporting, and how it works is generally when a child speaks to an adult and lets them know that there is some kind of abuse going on, the adult is duty bound to be able to step into a police station and inform them actually of what is happening. Oftentimes, parents or caregivers tend to reach out to different organizations like the NCPA, maybe organizations that work with these causes. However, ultimately, a report has to be filed with the relevant police station, whether it's the Women and Children's Desk or whether it is the police station itself, the report has to be filed. And from here, it goes into the probation officer. So each district, each province has a probation officer, and the police relays this to the probation officer, and there is an initial checking done where they check whether the child is in immediate danger, and like there's an assessment done. And then it moves on to what is called a case conference, where everybody that's relevant to the case, so the police, the probation officer, maybe the medical officers, a counselor, psychiatrist, along with the relevant legal officers, meet together to have a case conference before a report is given to the court, and the court then moves on to the judiciary system and the case itself, and also about the future of where the child will be. Ideally, if child has a safer option of a guardian, of somebody who can take the child in, that would be the first option. But if not, the child is moved into the probationary care systems, national care systems in Sri Lanka. And it's very important here for us to realize that, and we spoke about this earlier also, is that the child is the one who gets moved around in this whole situation. And collection of evidence takes time in Sri Lanka because there is so many moving parts to it. I mean, from the point of the evidence from the JMO, from the medical officers that need to come in about the child, the reports that needs to get to court, the legal system, so much of time and so much of moving parts that it is the girl who is the re-victimized again through this process. And unfortunately, a lot of our first responders are not trained how to pick up a report, language to be used with survivors, how you take a report, how you assess if a child is in danger immediately. And that leaves the child is re-traumatized again through that, right? And moving on to the court systems, how it works is once it is in the court, there is a whole process again. And we know that Sri Lanka does not have the best records in terms of the length of court cases. And the girls that we work with have an average of 8 to 10 years of a court case taking to be resolved because of postponements, because of a lack of evidence, and just systemic delays that cause the court case to drag on for so long. And some of the reasons for these are, of course, the fact that a lot of our government operations maybe don't have enough resources because of such heavy caseloads that they have. So how do they prioritize which are high profile, which need to be moved? So there's always a need to prioritize rather than give equity to all cases. And one of the other challenges also is the fact that our legal aid system, and that was a question, Mihiri, that you also brought up in terms of how the cases are funded, because not everybody can afford to have good legal counsel. The legal aid system exists in Sri Lanka, and there are lawyers who support survivors. However, the problem is that, again, they are stretched thin because of the number of lawyers within the legal aid system in ratio to the number of cases that they get, and they get all cases. So there is no specific lawyers that are in terms of just reserved for child abuse survivors or children who need support. And another challenge that we have within the system is that our courts, and I think Tony also will echo this, is that our courts are not the most child-friendly. So the frameworks that are set up for our children are not set up where they are given comfort, where they're given support, where they're given freedom to express themselves. Generally, court cases do take place in open court. The child, and there is no framework in the questions that the defense lawyer is able to ask the girls. So a lot of the girls who come to us also, it's heartbreaking when you hear the questions that they are asked in open court. So a lot of our girls decide to walk away, sometimes at the 8-year mark, at the 10-year mark, some even at the 12-year mark, they decide to walk away because it's better for their mental health to just close the door, put a stop to it, than actually fight more for justice, because it's a lot for them. In terms of evidence, it's a slightly challenging area again in terms of collection of evidence. the time that evidence takes to reach from the police to the medical officers, to the time it actually gets to the court, sometimes there can be delay lags of over 1.5 to 2 years, depending on the situation and the court case. So it is our judiciary system, while it is functional, needs to keep evolving and changing to support the needs of these survivors, to ensure that children can come forward and complain, and that they are not re-victimized for the next 10 to 15 years of their lives.
Definitely. And while we're talking about all these, the procedure that, from reporting a case, what that usually is like, I also want to ask, like, if we look at recent times, very recently in Sri Lanka, actually, we're hearing a lot of these cases, of abuse cases. What I want to know is, are they just coming to light now? Have they always been this way? Or is there actually a rise in these type of cases or abuse cases due to the current situation in Sri Lanka, when you take the pandemic and everyone being moved to lockdown and stuff like that? So is it that it's always been there, it's just that it's coming to light now, or has it actually seen a rise? Debbie, if you could share your thoughts on this aspect of it.
Yeah, so I think this is something in a certain aspect, it's always been there, and it's beginning to come out into light, because social media has taken predominance over the pandemic times, and everything's coming out on social media. But also, on the other hand, I feel like people are getting a little more bold in terms of what they are stepping into. Their limits are kind of getting blurred. So when it comes to the fine line between abuse and and ages with children and their activity, and things going, mental health issues, all this happening during lockdown, I think it's kind of taking its toll as well. I mean, like the other day, I was reading an article, and it was talking about, it actually shocked me, so I'd like to share it with you, because it said, from 17th June this year to 28th July, in those 42 days, 17,629 child sexual abuse material, just sexual abuse. Okay, we're not talking mental, we are not talking nothing, no emotional, just sexual abuse material had been uploaded from Sri Lanka. So whether it was videos, whether it was photographs, anything on child pornographic material had been uploaded. So if you break that down, it means for every 24 hours, 420 videos or articles or pictures or something had been uploaded from Sri Lanka. That is every hour 18. So people have time on their hands. People have, it's kind of becoming a bit of a trend. I mean, recently we saw on Facebook, there was this whole video that was going viral. So I think it's also becoming a trend to kind of post things online. So which means, lines are getting blurred, people's, limits are getting blurred. So it's also got something to do with the pandemic and lockdown, but not totally, because I think this has always been there. It's just never come out into the light like it has now.
And I think if we look into the, yes, Tony.
Yeah.
Okay, just a couple of things to add to that. Probably also on what Hazel stopped at. One of the critical things that we need is video evidence, where the complaints are videoed. In 1995, we set up the first video recording of complaints, so that children don't have to repeat their stories, because when they are made to repeat their stories, it's like the rape all over again. At that time, the minister G.L. Piris authorized 30 of those centers to be set up at all the district police stations. It's now 25 years on, and still the only video recording system is at the NCPA. So that shows you that how fast we are going on this. The other one, in terms of statistics, I think we did a survey for a medical doctor in Anuradhapura of 2,200 A-level students, and we had a 23% of abuse. And this has to take into account that some people don't speak out. It was a 16-page questionnaire. It was a kind of very professional questionnaire. So I would very safely say you will find in different communities between 1 in 30 and 1 in 6, 30% to 60% of children have undergone some abuse in their childhood.
Thank you for pointing that out, Tony. I think that's something a lot of us didn't know even about the video evidence aspect of this. I just want to focus on one aspect of this. I think when it comes to abuse, the conversation is mostly limited or focused around women and girls. So Jehan, if I can put you on the spot and just ask you, in terms of the culture we live in, and I think Tony pointed this out at the beginning as well, the mentality that we have in our society, you know, boys can't get pregnant, or boys should be boys and not cry and complain about it, or they should get over it. So, you know, from your perspective as a man, I mean, how does this translate towards boys now, and especially children? And how does it translate into their adulthood if they really can't voice out the injustice that has been done to them?
Yeah, it's a very sensitive topic in Sri Lanka. Child sexual abuse, sex education, all those are very sensitive topics in Sri Lanka anyway. When you talk about male abuse, it's a big issue, mainly because the way we look at it, homosexuality itself is illegal in Sri Lanka. So how does somebody come forward and talk about it? You're not going to get pregnant if you get abused. So there is no material issues or no future issues that can come from the family's point of view. It's like, okay, get on with it, get over it. You know, you're not going to die. That's the worst thing that could happen. And so they're put in this situation where, like, and it's a culture. They have, and boys, young boys, are not very good at building relationships. They have no one they confide in. No one, they don't have best friends they talk to. They don't go and talk to their mothers or fathers, or there's none of that. So all this is internalized. And what often happens is it's internalized. And then once they're old enough, they commit the same act. And we go into this same cycle of abuse, which has to be broken. And we need people to talk about it. And more than, I don't know, and I think it's with education, with all our schools, education systems, that's where everything has to start with our education systems, is to give people the understanding of what is right and wrong, and that they have a platform, and that it is okay to come and speak out. Every school has a counselor where somebody can go to, boy can go and talk to, but that doesn't happen often enough. It's something that we must look at.
Definitely. And I think, how about, like, see, boys and girls alike, whoever it is who's going through this, right? When it comes to these proceedings, I think it was mentioned before, they don't really have much of a voice. So it could Debbie, if I could actually ask you to comment on how does it actually work? Is it someone speaking on their behalf? Do they have any say at all? Specifically when it comes to the younger children, because, you know, you have this, like, I'm the adult, I'll make decisions for you. So in that sense, like, how does that translate? I mean, it is the child who's going through it at the end of the day, but do they have a voice? Do they have a say in what they're actually going through in these proceedings as well?
So with experience of, you know, Child Action Lanka, we work with about 90% of the kids that we work with are sexually abused kids. Something that we have seen over the years is that, you know, when it comes to their voice being heard, that's a very minor part of the whole issue for them. I mean, you know, everybody has something to say, but I think it's also partly to do with the cultural upbringing that we have. So as a child in class, a teacher says, you know, Pandita Venda Hadandepa, do what you're told, right? So children learn to not express their views. Children learn to not express their opinion. And so because of that, you know, they're almost in some sense waiting for adults to make a decision on their behalf. I think it's really important that we give children that opportunity to speak and encourage them to raise their voices as well. So like when it comes to, you know, all these issues, I would say, you know, child participation is really important, but it's quite given a backseat in a certain sense. At a lot of times, so even when we go into the police stations or anything like that, it's the adults, they speak to the child, but in terms of, there is a difference between speaking to listen and speaking with already an answer in your mouth. So very often what we get is, they've already got an answer, they've formulated some kind of answer before they've kind of listened to the child's view. So basically that in itself is a violation of a child's right, because the right to participate, the child's voice, what they think about it, because children, they may not express it the way we adults can express, when sexual abuse or any form of abuse happens, we might express it a lot more deeply and quite a profound explanation to it. But when it comes to children, children would be very bare minimal in the way they kind of expressed it, and you have to be specialized enough to understand what it actually means and what has happened, and be able to also kind of be able to draw out of them. So I feel like at this point our country doesn't have enough of that skill to be able to draw that kind of knowledge out of children. So for that reason, I would say, the child's voice is kind of in the background when it comes to a lot of these issues.
Jehan, is there something you'd like to add?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify. I mean, it's not that I'm comparing male abuse versus female abuse. I just wanted to clarify that point. That's a really difficult comparison, and not that getting pregnant is better than not getting pregnant. It's equally terrible across the board. I just wanted to make that point.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for that.
We just want to jump to one of the most important questions that we wanted to address from our meeting here today. So if we look at all the, most of the cases, most of the time, the children are quite well aware of who the perpetrator is or who is hurting them. And it's someone in their neighborhood, it's someone in their family, maybe it's someone in school. So if we could just talk a bit about what we can do to make sure children are safe, or the environment that the children are in are safe. So Debbie, if you could start the conversation off by, maybe giving us a little bit of advice on how parents can start to have this conversation with children at home, about their rights, about what they can do to keep themselves protected, the good touch, the bad touch conversation, or even about, what is the proper age that we should start, thinking about talking to our children about this. And how to keep the communication line open, just in case if a child does need to approach a parent, how you can make it, make them know that it's safe for them to talk to them. If you could just talk us through that.
Yeah, so I think it's quite interesting because children get talking about these things at a very young age on different levels, among their friends, among, in different conversations, it just happens to come up. And one of the things that I believe, I've got two girls, and for me, what I feel is it's better that we tell them the right thing and what is right and what is wrong at a young age, rather than them hearing myths from outside and then, feeling pressure to wanting to try things. So what I did with my girls is actually on very different levels. So with my older daughter, I was able to, share a little more, but also, very factual. And I made it quite a general conversation, just made it like a very open conversation. It was not like a taboo thing. And just wanted her to feel really comfortable to be able to come and ask me anything. What does sex feel like? Or what is sex, what is the whole act about, or what happens then, or why can't I have sex now, or anything like that, or what sex really is, in terms of whether she had questions or whether her friends had questions that they wanted to ask. But I wanted to just make them feel really, really comfortable to be able to come and ask. And I feel like the more we try to keep it a secret and kind of guard it like a little taboo thing, that's when it kind of becomes more attractive to want to kind of experiment and see where it's all going. And also then, they get open to all the different mates and friends bringing all kinds of information and So, I remember my daughter at that point, she'd come up and say, oh, but my friend said it's like this. And I said, no, that's not true. It can't be. And then with my younger one, like when I remember she was like 3 years old, 4 years old at that baby. People should not be touching you, wear your swimsuit. Just, out there. If anybody does try to do anything, you should say no. And just on a very simple note, obviously not going into the whole, act of whatever is going on, but just giving them, people, be careful. There are things out like this, and giving them that warning, which I feel like then as they grow up, like, now my teenage daughter, she's fine with having to come and speak with me about these things because she doesn't see it as, oh, I can't go and speak to mom about this. And I feel like as parents, we need to, sometimes we are the ones who are ashamed. Like in schools, teachers don't want to talk about sex education. They say, oh, go home and read page this to this. And if you have any questions, ask your parents or whatever. But I feel like if we leave that conversation open and keep those passages open, our children can actually be more informed. They know to draw the lines, and safeguarding is more. It becomes easier that way because it becomes like a two-way conversation.
Definitely, and I think that's extremely important. And unfortunately, I feel that I think even given how our culture is, in most homes, children might not feel comfortable, and even parents for that matter might not feel comfortable talking about this topic with their children. And I think that's like, it all starts at home, and that's like an important thing to tackle right at home as well. Sorry, Jehan, please do add in. Sorry, on mute.
Sorry. I 100% agree with what Debbie said, and also Mihiri mentioned it as well. I just wanted to add that we feel that we are protecting our children as teachers or as parents or as elders even by not giving them that information or talking to them about it. But we're in a digital world. They're going to pick this up by the time they're 8, 9, 10. So whether we like it or not, we're not protecting them by not giving them that information. By not having that conversation, we are not protecting them. We are better off having that conversation ourselves in an environment where we can control it. Definitely.
And like even Debbie mentioned it, even in schools, it is such that, that like say health science, they're teaching us the reproductive system. The chapters are either skipped or just quickly, like, you go through it really quickly so you don't have to really deal with it or tackle it with the children. But these are important things that, they need to know as well.
By the time they come to grade 7, they know everything. Trust me, now when schoolboys come to grade 7 and you get that Saukya lesson, they know everything by then.
And right, just to add one thing more, I completely agree with what Debbie and Jehan was saying. I think it's important for us to also give body autonomy to our children, because there is, and I think it's a slightly a cultural thing, when a child intuitively doesn't like somebody, we say, no, that's okay, go and give the person a hug, or go and it's just uncle so-and-so or auntie so-and-so, it's okay, give them a hug. But that teaches them to kind of swallow down that intuitive feeling that they have. And specifically as caregivers, as parents, when we say that somebody is okay without fully knowing or without fully saying, it also gives permission for the okay person to abuse our kids further. Because the kids tend to think, mom and dad said this person is okay, so how can it be bad? So I think, that body autonomy, allowing the child to pick who they want to have a physical connection with or any connection with, is very important as well.
Definitely, yeah. That's like, thank you so much for mentioning that. Actually, I think that's very important for everyone to know. So thank you, Hazel, for mentioning that. So if we come back to the aspect of schools, like we spoke about homes, like how can we, tackle this issue at homes? Jehan mentioned earlier, schools have a large part to play in it as well, and that is 100% true. So what can be done at a school level to actually tackle this and help these children? Tony, I believe you are working currently on certain aspects of this as well. If you could please tell us what more can these places, institutes do for these children?
Okay, thank you, Mary. Taking off from where Debbie and Jehan, everybody spoke, the two issues that they came up with: children should be listened to, and children should be given the freedom to participate, and children's voices should be heard about what they say. The third factor that is to make those two things happen is children should be empowered. Now, this is a little more difficult, and it can go haywire as well. And sometimes in the West, we see children are kind of way too empowered and their minds of their own. But it's a critical part of making a change. One of the things that we working at NCPA, that one of the first things that we worked on was the elimination of corporal punishment. Now, we had a lot of resistance to this from the schools, from parents, from religious institutions, on the basis that you spare the rod and spoil the child. But the reason when you look at corporal punishment is that you have a elder or a bigger person hitting another person. So we used to often ask the argument, well, would two people who are older solve a problem by hitting each other? And obviously we would say that's not the way. It's a dialogue and a discussion. So why not bring that down to the level of a child? I was working with an organization called Children's Zones of Peace, which was to look at how children were being assisted in times of war. This was a UNICEF-driven program. And we came up with the idea that why don't we think of making schools a zone of peace? Now, the level of things that go on in schools is that there are, in addition to the sexual abuse, there's cheating, there is bullying, there is very unhealthy competition. All of these things go on, and children are caught in a kind of a vortex that they don't know how to get off and how to get through it, because they don't want to sneak. They don't want to come back and tell all their problems to what's happening in the schools to their parents, because then they don't want the parents to take action. So what could be done? And I saw this firsthand, how it was done in Sweden when I had an option to go and study their system. That at different levels, they had children, parents, and the authorities in groups. So at different levels, different age groups and different standards. And they would discuss the problems they have and what solutions they could have to resolve those problems. So that brought in the fourth factor of empowerment, which is ownership. When children also own the means of solving their problems. So they are listened to, they participate, they are empowered by being given a chance to decide, and then they own the problem, and therefore they stop rebelling against everything. So I remember going back to my school time, you weren't considered a macho child if you didn't break every rule. If you didn't somehow undertake to get punished, you had to show a disregard for all that was under rules, because rules somehow were given to keep us in line and control us, and very often we didn't know why. So if children themselves participate in the rule making and they own it, then they would have. So we came up with a whole system, which I hope someday I still would see the light of day, where schools could be actually looked at having what we thought of was like some standardized, that if a school meets a certain standards of that kind of participation, that kind of ownership, that kind of decision making, then they could be given as a school as a zone of peace. And just to give an idea of what that empowerment meant, or what we did at the very start, the education department gave us teachers, lady teachers, whom we trained personally, and they spoke to the children about what they could do in case that they were threatened in any way, primarily sexual abuse, but also other areas, that they could bring it to these teachers who were called child protection officers. Now, NCPA has carried on with that a bit. And in the first 6 months, we got something like 14,000 responses from children who came back to the teacher and said, I am having a problem and an issue. And this was amongst the 40 teachers that we had trained. They were mainly lady teachers for obvious reasons. The idea is that then they have a sense of that they can actually make a complaint. There is somebody to listen to them. And then the teachers were given levels at which they could respond to those complaints. If they could solve the complaint between them and the student, fine. If they had to take it to the principal or to the education ministry or to the police, or even finally up to the level of the president, we were able to set up the system that they could take it. And some of those cases did go to courts. And we tried to avoid going to courts, but sometimes we had to. So that was how we were working on the whole system. It has kind of died down now, and I hope that sometime we can go back to it, because schools, if you look at it, are the place that children have the most amount of input into their lives. 6 to 7 hours a day for 15, 20, maybe 18, 20 years. Now, if they can get the right way to behave, the right way to act, the right way to think, then they go on to become much better citizens in all of these ways. There's a lot to be said about what that empowerment does, but I'll leave it in case you need to ask questions.
Thank you, Tony. Yes, I think what you answered itself is that there's a lot of information there, especially I think in terms of in schools, how maybe the principals and the teachers themselves can take action to maybe set up an environment to make it safe to talk and to report and know that they are safe in that environment. There's just something that I just want to touch in on. I think when it comes to anyone who has gone through any kind of traumatic experience, whether it's physical, mental, or sexual abuse, I mean, there is a lot of strain in them mentally, which gives physical impacts as well. And I think one of the main challenges, I think we touched on this before as well, the main challenge a lot of everyone usually has is not being able to move on from that experience, because in society they are looked upon as the victim. And I know, Hazel, you are a strong advocate in moving the victim status into a survivor status. So if you could just talk us through why it's actually important that as a community, we change our mentality to think and to interact with people who have been through this experience and look at them as survivors. If you could just explain, what impact that actually creates in their recovery journey. And also, I think in this topic in general, that shift in our thinking, what it can do to help maybe increase the security and, the future of children, making sure that it's safe, how shifting that mentality can actually help us.
Yeah, Mihiri, I think it's extremely important for us as a community, as a country, to stop believing the myths that surround childhood sexual abuse of any kind. The survivors are seen as victims, and they're also seen as a problem that maybe society doesn't want to deal with. Because a lot of things that I can say that I've heard that our girls deal with directly is that their parents say, because of you, there is shame in the family. Because of you, your younger sister can't get married. I can't give you in marriage. You tempted the abuser. And this adds on. No child deserves to be sexually abused in any way. Child is to bear the abuse as well as being victimized and set aside. It doesn't help them with their recovery. It doesn't allow them to reach their potential. I mean, I see children who have so much of potential, but they have been told that because of what happened to them, they should be silent. They shouldn't speak up, because if they tell their story or if they talk about it, society won't accept them. That brings us to where we as a community, what are we doing to these young survivors? It's not just the abuser that's destroying their life, Mihiri, like you mentioned, right? It is us as a community. There's two ways of thinking. We either look at them with the ane pau expression, ane pau, they can't, mokut behe, paume lamai, and we tend to be so patronizing to them that they themselves probably think they can't do stuff, or they have no potential, or their life is ruined. Or the other extreme is completely ignoring them, completely just leaving them alone, right? All a child needs, like we spoke before, the safety, the happiness. Child sexual abuse is not the end of the road for anybody. It doesn't mean that anybody's life is over. It just means that there are additional challenges to be faced. No child can face this on their own. No child can successfully come out on the other side without mental health support. It means that the child needs to know that they have value, that they can contribute to society. Like I love what Tony said, that at the end of the day, they will become better contributing members of our country and citizen, right? And I think that's where we as a community need to say, there's nothing wrong with you. You didn't ask for what happened to you. It is the perpetrator's fault. It will never be your fault. It doesn't set you aside. Like, I know that some parents have concern to even let their kids play with a child who has been sexually abused because they think that it exposes their child to things. But that steals the child's childhood. And I would say, just treat them like normal people. Just treat them like you treat your friends. Just treat them with respect, with dignity, with everything that all of us want to have. They deserve it too. And there is no they, like there's no they and them. There is no sexually abused. There is no abused community. We're all a community. And I think that respect, dignity, and just being there as a community, available and saying, we're here for you. It's very important.
Definitely. And I think we all need to realize that it's, we can't just say, it's the parents' responsibility to educate their children. It's the school's responsibility to educate the children. It's a collective effort. And if that isn't put in, I really don't know if, we'll see results, because it needs to come in from, all sorts of different aspects. If not, I mean, it would be sad if we are to go on. So I think even individually, we need to make a conscious effort towards it as well. And I think that's what I want to ask next as well. Like, yes, as an individual person, like say if you're a person who isn't directly involved, like say the way y'all are with children, if it's just a normal person who hears and sees these things, yes, we can't make a difference when it comes to changing the law or changing policies. We don't have a say there, and that is okay. But there's still so much that can be done. So I guess what I want y'all to kind of enlighten all of us, and especially to everyone listening as well, as an individual person, what can we still do to help this cause? Because it's not that nothing can be done. So instead of just hearing about a situation and thinking, okay, what can I contribute? I'm just a normal person. When there is things that can be done, and I want to open it up to all of you actually to share your thoughts as an individual person. What can someone actually do to contribute to, help make this change? Shall we start off with, Jehan, go ahead.
So I think we just need to call it out. What can we do as an individual? We just need to call it out. I'm sure almost everyone in Sri Lanka either has had or knows somebody who has had some form of abuse during their life. And there's somebody, including me, I would be the first to put my hand up and say, it has happened and I'm not called it out. I've seen it happen. I'm not talking specifically about abuse. It could be harassment in the workplace. It could be bullying. It could be cyber exploitation. It could be anything. It all stems from the same place. But I have not called it out. We need to start calling it out, and we need to make it cool to call it out. Right now, it's not cool to call things out. We need to, and that's how Sri Lanka works. That's how Colombo works. people jump on anything if it's cool, if it's the cool thing to do, if it's whatever. So we need to make that trend. We need to make calling things out, make it go viral. And that we can do. So what can one person do? Call it out. If everyone starts calling things out, it's going to become the cool thing to do.
And I think also one of the things that is important is to make sure that some of these things tend to float into the direction of becoming jokes. I don't quite understand that, but I think we've all been guilty at some point of laughing about something in this, whether it is girls getting harassed when they walk on the road, whether it is, and I think that zero tolerance mindset needs to come in for us as a community where we say, and sometimes it's really hard, right? How do you stand up to your friends? How do you stand up to the ones that you are closest with? How do you call them out? But I think it's important that we actually start, like Jehan said, calling them out, and also not treating it as a funny joke because it's been going on forever. Like we recently did a session for a leading educational institute in Sri Lanka. And one of the girls there actually said that she didn't realize that being harassed on the streets or on the bus was sexual harassment because she's grown up with it and she thought it's normal in Sri Lanka. So trying to stop normalizing abuse of any kind is also very important for us.
Yeah, that is really true.
Sorry. Also, I think, we need to realize you're not too old or you're not too young to take action. Whatever age you are, you're in a position to take action. And, we are living in a very, modern kind of society where we're taking action on so many things. Why not take action, just like Jehan said and just like Hazel said? Why not take action against these things? What is it that stops us from taking action when it comes to, these kind of things? What is it that makes us stop? Is it because if it was somebody else, maybe it's easier for us to call it out. If it was our own, would we be brave to step out there and say wrong is wrong? So I think, like when I'm talking about age, like we've started a program called Junior Ambassadors of Child Rights and Youth Ambassadors of Child Rights. Now the junior guys, they're only like 11, 12 years old, and they started looking into what child rights looks like. Listening to them speak, I was thinking, oh my goodness, we've just put the little ones aside and think, they don't understand. But, these guys, they've got ideas too. And I feel like, they're walking around saying, we want to talk about this in school. We want to talk about it at our assembly. We want to put it up in our classrooms to say these things are wrong and these shouldn't happen. And I think we need to do more of encouraging, irrelevant of age, irrelevant of who they are, even being able to stand up, irrelevant of who it is that we see doing wrong. We need to be strong enough to do that.
It's very true. Tony, is there something you would want to add to this?
Probably just one thought. Absolutely agree that with all that was said about speaking out, about believing in people. The other thing I would say that you will find that there come across your path, well, two things. One is you may get opportunities to join and support somebody speaking out, or many people speaking out. And if you can help in that, that'll be great. The other is that you may get an opportunity of something that you feel really passionate about, and that opportunity of doing something about it will come your way. Make sure you grab it and do something about it. Because sometimes we feel that, well, just like children, that we can't do anything and the problem is too big. But something can come your way that can make a massive change, that gives you an opportunity to make a significant change. So make sure you take that opportunity when it comes.
Thank you, Tony. This is just a question that I was thinking about, actually something that Jehan said earlier on that I was thinking about it. Now, when it comes to any scenario, there's a flip side. So we focus a lot on the victim. And I think that's where victim shaming also comes in. But I think we tend to forget that there's a perpetrator also, because there's so much focus on the victim. Even the solutions that we are looking at sometimes, it's focused on the victim. So I'm just wondering, is there a way that we can implement solutions where we are focusing on the perpetrator? So, I mean, if there are 8,000 cases of abuse, that means there are 8,000 abusers out there. So in terms of bringing that number down, is there something that in our country, is there something that's being done in that aspect? And if not, is there something that we could as society do to bring the number of perpetrators down in terms of, is it informing, is it education, is it something that we can do in schools? And is there, this is a thought that I had, if there's anyone who would want to.
So we did some work on that. So let me make a quick comment, and then the others can give their opinion. So one thing that you remember that helps you to kind of change your mindset towards when you call the perpetrator, that more often than not, that perpetrator at one point was a victim. So what research has shown is that people who are abused, 80% of them are likely to continue the abuse in a passive or aggressive form. That requires explanation. I know we don't have time for that. But so can you remember that those who are abused will continue the abuse, or will, because that's the way that they, in one way, they get over the shame of their abuse if they can do it to somebody else. And it can be passive or it can be aggressive. So when we understand that, we probably will have a slightly different, more human response to the perpetrator, rather than only seeing them as evil monsters. We tried to go into prisons. I was working with the prison fellowship, and I was on the prison society to do a kind of analysis amongst the prisoners who have been taken in for abuse, to find out all of it, but we didn't get too far with it. But I think that's one place that we can try to make a difference as far as the perpetrators are concerned.
Anybody else want to share their thoughts?
Yeah, okay. I'll have a go. So yeah, I also think that if you're in childcare, in education, that you should have some kind of child protection, child education background, in addition to your teaching qualifications or coaching qualifications, that you should be cleared. We do have, you have to get a police report and a Grama Niladhari certificate to work. But I'm talking about something more than that. Or at the very least, a training in recognizing the signs of abuse in children, being trained in communicating with them, be trained in communicating with parents with abuse. So I think that is not there. That is very loose. As long as you have passed your teaching exams or coaching exams, you can go into education or childcare, Montessori teacher, whatever it is. But I think if you're going into that sphere of childcare, we can have some legislation which requires some kind of training and some kind of vetting that you have not committed some kind of offense in the past.
I think just to add one thing onto what Jehan said, we don't have a offenders register here in Sri Lanka. I think there's many reasons for it. I'm not going to get into that, but I think having something like that also would be able to support a background check in relation to what Jehan just said also, because if not, being able to identify those who are convicted or have served time is super difficult when proper records don't exist. And I think also having rehabilitative programs in a safe manner, because right now there's so much of stigma around everything. If somebody hasn't offended yet, but is having certain thoughts or certain emotions, where would they be able to go in a safe space where maybe they will counselor of people to prevent them from actually offending and supporting them?
Just going on that, currently in Sri Lanka, is for anyone who's interested, are there institutes that do give training on child rights? Just so if there are any teachers or anyone who's watching here, and if they do want to get further educated on it, there is something that either one of you would know, just no.
Not that I'm aware of.
But I'm assuming if that's the case, then I know there are some degrees and certificates available, I suppose. That would only be but in terms of training for teachers, maybe that is something, an improvement that our education system itself could have as well.
Or somebody could just do it free. It's not, it won't cost a lot. It's just an online, just a thing, just a awareness campaign. Actually, when I got into coaching first, I did my coaching in Australia. Before we did anything, the first thing I had to do was to do this childcare course, not course, there was a awareness program. And only once you do that, do they allow you to get into any form of coaching. So it's a simple thing. I think anybody can do it. And actually, we don't need somebody to do it for us. If a school or a community or a Montessori want to do it, if the material is up there, we can just choose to do it.
I think also it's really important in reducing the number of perpetrators. It's quite important to, educate people about what sexual abuse is like, or what any form of abuse is, or child rights are. Very often, when we approach these families, if it's the father, for example, he would say, it's my child, my property, what's your problem? So, very often especially in rural communities, that is quite common, because it's like, my child, I can do what I want, what's your problem with it? So it's a lack of education there as well. So I think we need to, be active in spreading the word out there. You can't treat a child like this, this is wrong. That could probably help a little bit as well.
Just to add on to that as well, I think we also have this kind of, or tend to have this preconceived notion that like an offender or an abuser is supposed to be a certain type of way or look a certain type of way, which might not actually be the case, because like Debbie kind of hinted on it, but most of the abuse cases that are there, the person who is, the offender is actually known or very close to the, I don't want to say victim, but that child itself. So I think also kind of getting rid of any, preconceived notions that we already have in place, that this is the only type of person who could possibly be, an offender. Any thoughts or comments on that aspect of it?
Rayushka, I think that's a very valid point, because most perpetrators are seen to be men in the first place, which is not true.
Yeah.
There is no particular gender that abuses. So I just wanted to throw that out. Like, like some people say, oh, I can't leave my child with a guy, but I'd happily leave my child with a girl or a female. And so I think that's something for us to really understand, that abuse doesn't stick to gender, or being an abuser doesn't stick to gender.
Sure. That's true.
I think it's not restricted to age also, I think, because in some cases, it's a child itself that's doing the abusing. So I think that's something that we don't even really talk about in society, that the child could be the problem itself as well. So like you said,
specifically like in schools, I think there's a lot that happens in schools that's just not even touched on or not even discussed at all. So yeah.
Sometimes it's just, we create the awareness of like stranger danger kind of thing. Exactly. It may not be a stranger, it's somebody who's very, very familiar with the child, who you're really familiar with, who you let into your house all the time, who could be the, next perpetrator as well.
Yes, sometimes we kind of identify that there are 4 places that children are supposed to be safe. That's their home, their neighborhood, the school, and their place of worship or religious place. But these are the places that they are most, 95% of the abuse takes place in their safe zones or seeming safe zones. And the abusers are, well known. I told you that survey that we did, and out of the all of the cases of abuse that those students gave, there wasn't a single stranger. It was all by someone who was known to them. The last one is that child abusers are often seductors, and they use seduction and not brute force. Those are rapists, and that's a different thing. But with children, it's more people who are use a form of seduction, and by look they are very nice. In fact, in some of the foreign magazines, they advise pedophiles to the best place to get hold of children is to become a volunteer in a church, because children are put into your care and everybody believes you're a good person.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on those points. I think we've come to the end of today's discussion, and we went a little overboard as well in time. But I think the things that we've discussed and the insight that all four of you was able to give, I think that will be very useful to anyone who's listening in on this conversation. I want to thank Debbie, Tony, Jehan, and Hazel for being a part of the conversation today. And I especially want to thank you for the service that you're doing to our community and for the communities that you're working with. I mean, the work that you guys do, it's incredible. So I just want to make a small announcement. Child Action Lanka and Emerge Lanka are both launching special campaigns this month, all in relation to the topic that we've been discussing today. So make sure you follow their social media pages and you stay updated on that and see what you can do. Emerge is doing a special awareness campaign. It's a community-based awareness campaign. And Child Action Lanka is launching a mobile app, which is going to give users access to emergency numbers. So it's catered to make calling to emergency easier for children and women in need. So make sure you follow their social media pages and stay updated on that, and also see how you can help to make a change and how you can support Emerge and Child Action Lanka in the work that they are doing.
So I think that would conclude our first session. So thank you so much again, Debbie, Tony, Hazel, and Jehan, for taking your time to actually come and talk to us. And I think you shed a lot of light on a lot of important areas with regards to this topic. So thank you so much for that. And also thanks to all of you who are watching, and thank you for being part of our very first show. We hope that this conversation was insightful for all of you. We really hope that you also learned a lot from it, and we encourage you to see in what areas that you could actually maybe help out in your own way. It might not be something big, but that's okay. Even the smallest bit helps. We have linked the website and the social media handles for both Child Action Lanka and Emerge Lanka below in our description box. So if you want to get directly in touch with them, you are welcome to do so. Please do also subscribe to this channel, and don't forget to follow us at Open Conversations SL on Instagram to stay updated for the future shows that we will be coming out with as well. If you do have any inquiries or questions that you'd like to ask us or get in touch with us in any way, again, our description box below has our contact details so that you could get in touch too. So until then, please do stay safe, and until next time. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.